So this week's video is a little bit of a change of pace. I'm going to show you how I remove these leaking skylights in this sunroom. This is not my home. It's a long-term project I've been working on, and this house is where my shop is located, and that's how I pay for my rent, sweat equity fixing up parts of the house. So I'm not going to get into a lot of the teardown of the room. It's been, like I said, a very long-term process. You can see this skylight especially was leaking really badly. They had actually cut open the ceiling, put a water heater pan in the ceiling, and had it dripping to the outside. That's how they fixed, air quotations, that skylight. So initially when I was taking apart this room, the owners hadn't decided whether or not to replace the skylights or just completely get rid of them. But pretty much everyone I've ever talked to, including a lot of realtors, suggest just getting rid of them because no matter how good a quality they are, they're eventually going to leak. So fast forwarding a couple months, I had to sister up all the joists in the room because they were undersized. That was a long project in and of itself, and then I could finally get to the skylights. So you see from the inside, I'm blocking the rim of the lights so that when I get up on the roof and take them out, I have a space to put the plywood. Now, just for purposes of people watching this video, this is my first time doing something like this. I think I did a good job based on the fact it's been months and they haven't leaked, but I knew going into it this was a temporary patch. The roof itself, as you could probably tell in the video, needs a full replacement. The torch down needs to be replaced. The homeowner has already talked to professional roofers. So basically what I am doing is buying enough time in between the funds used for the sunroom and the funds needed for the roof to get by. So that was part of the reason I took on this project. Not having done skylights or torch down before, I knew it didn't have to last really even probably a year or two. So to start this off, I'm assuming these are inexpensive grade skylights. I don't know a lot about skylights. I just kind of started to deconstruct the frame. They're bubble lights, so it has an outer frame. You need a special bit in order to get those off. They're hex heads, and then there's 2 layers of this plexi that pops off, and then there is in fact an inner frame. You can tell by the roof these had been leaking before. It looked like they tried multiple things in order to fix them, including new torch down on the top, torch down patches, varieties of caulks, the pan inside, but both of them actually ended up leaking. So then there's this other inner frame, same process. It was just attached with a couple screws. I can pop that off as well. And then there was just a wooden frame raised up off the roof that also had to be removed. So what I thought I could do was cut around this, peel off the flashing, and then quickly just kind of patch the whole thing. So what I tried to do was nicely score where I thought the flashing was based on the flashing that was exposed on the bottom of the frame, and then pop this all out. Obviously, I'm saying that, and the way I'm saying it because it didn't end up working out that way. So you can see I'm just kind of peeling off that torch down. You could see the flashing that's already on there. Like I said, I thought I could just pop this off and then put on the plywood and keep going. But there, like I said, there was a variety of materials attaching all of this in place. I am not a roofer, but I'm assuming that this is a cluster. You can see there's multiple layers of materials from where they must have patched it before, and at some spots there was like a 1/4 inch difference in where the skylight started and where the torch down started, so there was quite a big gradient change as well. So I went from doing this kind of nicely to just tearing out parts of it because the patch I was planning on putting on there was now going to turn into a much bigger patch. But you can see the flashing just kind of pops off the side, and then it's starting to look a little Frankensteinish. This was not attached very well. Most of this was coming up really easily just by scraping it. And they did have a membrane on the outside, but the top part was pooled with water, which was probably part of the reason why this was all leaking. Water was getting in there pretty much constantly. So at this point you could see I did the blocking on the inside of the room, but I also wanted to show you how to do it from the top side. I'm assuming a lot of people that might be replacing skylights did not tear down the entire ceiling to do it, because you wouldn't have to do that unless you were also planning on replacing the ceiling like I was. So from the top, it's a similar process. You can see I can kind of just hammer my blocking into place and then screw it from the top, getting it underneath that plywood so the patch I have to go on top has something to sit on. So doable from both sides. Apologies for the shaky camera. I couldn't really help it. The tripod's sitting on the roof, and so that's what that was from. So once I had the wooden parts, my camera must have messed up taking those out, but they were just screwed to the top. I undid those screws and popped them off, and you could see the shape of the ceiling. The one skylight that had the water pan underneath of it, there was a rot spot, so that turned into cutting up quite a big patch of ply, replacing that. Basically what I'm doing is raising the blade of my saw so it's not going to cut through any of my joists, and I'm going from the center of a joist to a center of a joist and cutting out that patch so then I could put a whole new piece in place. This ended up not being that big of a deal because as you can see, the torch down on there was already a mess, and I ended up peeling off most of it. So that means that this bottom portion here, I didn't have to take out a ton of it. And like I said, this is the definition of a temporary patch because the homeowner already knows they have to replace this roof in the somewhat near future. So you can see I went joist to joist. And since I doubled up all those joists, there's now quite a lot of surface area to attach the new piece to. And you can see that this is just completely rotted through. So it was 2 sections I ended up taking out. Those are those 2 sections. And I believe, I don't know if I filmed it, but there's a little part above this I also ended up taking out. And then I already had the OSB from patching the skylight holes, and I could pop that in place. So like I said, I lost some footage on this, but in order to cover the skylight holes, a similar process to how I'm patching it here. There's obviously a perimeter measurement for the OSB for the skylights. I just measured it and plopped it in place, added some screws and some nails, and that's how I patched it. So now once all of this is in place, I could actually start fixing the roof. So that is what that looks like. And as you can see, there's quite a few layers. It's not really attached very well. So what I did here was, and this is the DIY of this part of the project coming out, I just kind of assumed it would be best to get as much loose stuff off as possible, remove as much of this membrane as possible, and then when I go to put my base sheet down, it has better connection because it's not on top of all of this junk. So that was pretty much an afternoon process of peeling off all of this loose stuff. I had said at this point I had already resigned myself to the fact that I couldn't just do a nice patch around the skylights. I was going to do a full patch covering both of them, including in the middle. So I really did take up as much of this rough stuff as possible. Also, removing some of these layers helped even out the depth differences in the roof. So that is what I was left with, and at this point I'm going to start preparing the surface for the torch down. So once again, I went and got some mastic or some roofing cement. I know people call it multiple different things, and I decided to kind of even out this layer of undulation essentially in the top of the roof before putting the base sheet down. That once again was an assumption I made of something I wanted to do. Don't know if that's necessarily exactly what you do, but I don't think it would hurt. So I did that before the base sheet. This is the base sheet I'm using to put on top of what I had, basically just recreating a torch down roof. and then this is the torch down I'm using on top of that base sheet. When I first did this project, I had to do a lot of research about torch down. There's a lot of different materials, and each base sheet and top sheet have to match and go with each other. So that was kind of what I from all of my research gathered were the two combinations to work in my circumstances. So for the base sheet, I'm just going to lay this on top of my patch, and then I'm going to attach it with some roofing nails and some flat washers in order to keep it in place. These actually worked really well because it was extremely windy, of course, the days I got to the part where I was bringing sheets of roofing up. So those washers will help hold everything in place, and they're metal, so when you go to do the torch down, they don't melt. They're harder to find. I had to find these metal washers on Amazon. Couldn't find them in the Home Depot or the Lowe's. Those all have the plastic washers. But that's how I held everything in place. And then before the day was over, around the outside, I just once again used some mastic in order to hold all of that down. So I think there was a day or two in between doing this and the torch down. It actually rained both of those days, and the skylights did not leak. At this point, I believe this footage is back from March, and I've had no issues with leaking. So while, like I said, I'm not a roofer, this is a common occurrence with the camera falling over. The reason I decided to post this, because this is old footage, is just because of the fact that it hasn't leaked at this point. And if you live in South Jersey, you know we've gotten quite a substantial amount of rain in the last 3 months. So I think this patch is going to hold until full replacement. So this is just showing the 2 days later, like I said, we actually got rain, and I know it wasn't leaking at all because at the time the room was a huge mess. I had stuff all over the place from the patching, and there was no water seen on the inside, which would have been very visible just based on how much dust was in the area. So before I put the torch down on, I read that you should put this primer on top of the old roof. So that is what I did. I believe this is available locally, but I needed it last minute, so I ordered it on Amazon. And I just sprayed around the entire old roof with this primer. It just is going to help the torch down stick, especially to this roof, which is pretty old and fairly compromised. It sprays just like paint, but unfortunately it's kind of like a liquid tar, so if you get it on your hands, it does not come off very easily. You let it dry, and then you could start rolling out the torch down. Now this was definitely something I'd never done before. Like I keep saying, I only really had to worry about getting it to stick, not last 10 years. So I cut my sheets inside, laid them on the outside, and had watched multiple videos about how to do this. To basically roll up half of it and then just torch it in place. The first one went down surprisingly pretty well. Basically, I was just trying to stick to making sure I got that 1/8 inch bleed on the outside of my piece and that it stuck. The second one, as you will see, I think I overheated a little bit too much. It was starting to get footprints in it, but in general, like I said, this hasn't leaked and it's been multiple months, so I think at this point it's actually pretty good to go. This was definitely something that, and I'm sure people experience this watching any sort of videos online, the professionals doing it, make it look so much easier than it actually is. So then I had to do 3 layers, and like I said, I'm covering that whole surface area. So at this point, the roof essentially got a whole new layer of torch down because it was quite a large area that I was covering. And I just heated this up and worked pretty slowly using a trowel, margin trowel on the edges in order to get that bleed out, which is what everyone who shows you how to do this really recommends you look for. And like I said, definitely something I think a professional hand should do, but I think I did a decent job of getting it done. So like I said, this is the important part, that bleed out, getting it down. So then the entire perimeter of that I put also mastic on, and then on top of that mastic you use this reinforced tar sheet, which once again the tar sheet has to match the kind of mastic you're using. and that is essentially the patch. So that's everything in place. It's not really pretty, but this house has 2 flat roofs on both sides, and both of them are going to have to eventually be replaced. So I think this will hold up long enough for that to get done. You can see that middle sheet was the one I think I overheated a little bit too much. And I'm sure in the comments people will come and say all the things I did wrong, which is good because there wasn't a lot of great information or videos I could find on the full process of how to do this. So if some professionals come into the comments and recommend stuff for people watching this video, I have no problem with that. I actually encourage it. And like I said, before I even put up the ceiling, it was like a month or 2 of making sure this didn't leak, and I had no issues. So then going forward, I'm not going to do a ton, but for people interested finishing up the ceiling, I insulated it, put up a moisture barrier, which I don't know if I have footage on, and then finished it with wood. So now it looks like a coffered ceiling. And if you're interested in how I did this look with the coffered ceiling, which is more my pace, woodworking is kind of my bread and butter, that video I posted last week showing this whole process of how I got from having the insulated roof to this coffered look. But this project has been a long-term process. I didn't film the whole thing up till now. This is basically all the footage I have of it. I probably won't film a lot more, but hopefully someone gets something out of it and helps them fix up their roofs and or convinces them not to get skylights, because they will eventually leak.